Welcome to the Layer by Layer Poetic Features for Psalm 14. Our goal is to reveal the distinctive beauty and power of the original text of Psalm 14 as the next best thing to knowing Hebrew yourself. Our three features are all and nothing, here, here, and the world corrupt once again. Our first is all and nothing. Psalm 14 speaks in absolutes. There is no hope among humans, none at all. The only hope for Israel is from Zion, from her God, who is unlike corrupt humanity and can still bring restoration. The poem begins with the fool proclaiming, "There is no God." This is not the statement of an atheist claiming that God does not exist, but rather the statement of one who believes God does not engage, meaning God will not judge or hold any accountable for their wickedness. It is the license to act wickedly with no fear of punishment. The first four verses show what develops from this thinking: wholesale corruption in which none does good. The Lord looks to see if there is any one who retains wisdom. But the answer is none. All have turned to corruption, and none still does good. If we look only at the affirmative and negative Hebrew uses of there is and there are, we see a pattern. God's question, "Is there one who acts wisely?" is sandwiched between multiple negatives. There is none. No, not one. The message could not be more stark or hopeless, if it were the full story. But this starkness only lasts through the first four verses. In verse 7, in the prayer that deliverance would come from Zion, from the Lord, there is another poetic message. The word for there is, yesh, which we found in God's question, reappears 4 times by sound in the words deliverance, Israel, rejoice, and one more Israel. The hearer would hear a fourfold echo at the end of the psalm. There is, there is, there is, there is. When the psalmist looks at the earth, there is no hope. But when he looks to the Lord, there is. We'll now move to our second feature, here, here. Repeated roots provide strong alliteration, amplifying the impact of words within the overall message. 3 such repetitions in this psalm cause the audience to hear, twice, a sequence of strong emotions that outline the overall message. The simplest device for emphasis is repetition. After exact repetition, Hebrew loves a repetition of word roots. Greek does this as well. Often in poems, roots repeat in different sections of the psalm. When they repeat in the same phrase, it really draws attention. The audience hears the same sounds twice in close succession, reinforcing the impact of what is said. 3 times in Psalm 14, a root appears twice in a phrase, drawing our attention at a very emotional level to the following. In verse 4, those who eat people as they have eaten food prompts a feeling of disgust and horror. The psalmist wants the audience to emotionally engage and to consider these wicked people as their own enemies, who have nearly lost their humanity. In verse 5, if those same people had grasped the truth, they would have feared a fear, knowing the judgment they were bringing upon themselves. This evokes a sober recognition of the severity of their error. Had they understood, everything would have been different. Had they understood, none of this oppression would have happened, and they would have been rightfully fearful of God and reverential. And finally, in verse 7, when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, there's the vindication and joy. The verbal repetition thus magnifies just how grotesque the image is in verse 4, just how serious the error is in verse 5, and just how joyous the vindication is in verse 7. It's as if the poet is saying, "Hear, hear just what I am saying. The wickedness is grotesque, very grotesque. Their error is great. If only they had understood, they would tremble with fear. But, the Lord will restore our fortunes, which is all we need to rejoice and be glad." That is the end of the story. Rejoicing and gladness. Hear it loud and clear. Our last poetic feature is the world corrupt once again. Psalm 14 alludes strongly to the flood story, in which God destroyed the earth by a flood as judgment for the utter corruption of humanity. The psalm uses language from the flood story to present humanity as just as corrupt once again. In the reason for the flood given in Genesis 6:11-13, there are 4 occurrences of one verb. In the first 3 instances, it means to be corrupt. The earth was corrupt. God saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way. In the last instance, however, it means to destroy or eliminate, when God tells Noah, "I will destroy them." Within the Genesis passage itself is the poetic message. The threefold occurrence of corruption indicates maximal corruption, such that judgment must come. In the 4th instance, this judgment is thus justly announced. The same verb occurs in the first verse of Psalm 14, saying of the wicked that they have corrupted their deeds. Without using the exact wording of the flood passage, it nonetheless provides the same meaning. All have done abominable deeds. The earth is filled with violence because there is none who acts wisely, who does what is right. The flood taught a simple lesson. Corruption leads to judgment. Corruption that fills the earth leads to judgment that fills the earth. This lesson was forgotten by the wicked in Psalm 14, as indicated by verse 5. Had they learned that lesson, they would have feared the Lord. But because they did not, they continue to shame and oppress others who take refuge in the Lord. The poetic resonance with the flood story underscores the depth of the corruption, truly covering the whole earth, and therefore truly deserving of complete and utter judgment. But it echoes the entire story with the recognition that the judgment was deserved, and the judgment was not the end of the earth. Deliverance did come, even if only for 8 people in the flood. But deliverance would equally come for Israel one day, when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people. The world was corrupt once again, but the Lord would also be the deliverer once again. This has been the Poetic Features video for Psalm 14, in which we explore the natively Hebrew poetic nature of the psalm. Our overview video provides a coherent interpretation of the psalm, and our exegetical issues video discusses other scholarly views. All these videos are offered free of charge, thanks to the generosity of our donors. Please visit us at cdbr.org to learn more. Thank you.